Where the Mulo Walks Muléskro Temm, the evening had grown deep, and a starless sky hung low above the camp. Smoke drifted over the ground like a ghostly river, carrying the scent of wood, horses, and old iron. Between the wagons, families were gathered. A few quiet laughs, a distant accordion, the soft thud of a door closing somewhere in the dark. When the fire burned low, the children crept closer. Their faces glowed red from the embers. Puri Mamie sat on her blanket, back straight, hands resting in her lap. Her face was a map of years, lines that spoke of roads long walked, and in her eyes there flickered a light that did not come from the flames. She waited until the grown-ups stopped talking. Then she took a twig, placed it in the fire, and when it cracked and flared to life, she began to speak. "You know the Mulo, my children," she said, her voice carrying that tone of someone who knows more than she dares to tell. "He is the one who walks between breaths. When someone forgets the name of the dead, when no song is sung for them anymore, the Mulo stirs in his sleep, and he goes looking for the one who woke him." The children glanced at each other, wide-eyed, and for a moment the crackling fire sounded like footsteps in snow. A gust of wind rushed through the circle, lifting a spark that danced and vanished. "Where does he go?" a small boy asked, barely older than 6. His sister nudged him, but Puri Mamie smiled. "He goes where no song are left to sing," she said. "A place you must not look for and must never see. A Muléskro Temm." She spoke the name so softly that even the wind seemed to listen. "Deep down in the earth," she whispered, "live the shadows of the forgotten. No sun, no laughter, only the breath of the Mulo. And whoever hears him once forgets what silence used to be." One of the girls began to cry, and Puri Mamie gathered her close. "Don't be afraid," she murmured. "The Mulo only comes for those who've already been forgotten." Lallo sat closest to the fire. He smelled the sap in the burning wood, watched the glow dance in the old woman's eyes. Something in her voice made him sad, though he couldn't tell why. "Mamie," he asked softly, "have you ever been there, to a Muléskro Temm?" She fell silent for a while, her gaze lost in the flames, as if searching for a face she once knew. "Once," she said at last, "in a dream. It smelled of iron and cold bread. There was no sky, only mist, and the voices of those no one remembers." The children huddled closer. The fire cracked, and somewhere in the distance, a dog began to howl, a long, broken cry. Puri Mamie raised her head. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "He walks tonight, the Mulo. If the wind stays warm, he'll rest, but if it turns cold, he'll begin to search again." Lallo felt the breeze brush his cheek, gentle at first, then sharp like breath. "Mamie," he whispered. "Don't go near him, my child," she said. "Where the Mulo walks, the soul is the first to freeze." And then only the fire spoke. A single crack, a sirmam, and the night fell quiet again. Chapter 1. The first fire, the night after the story, was quieter than the rest. The wind had died. Even the horses breathed softly. A thin veil of smoke hung over the wagons, and the fire in the middle burned down to slow red eyes. Every now and then a log cracked, as though it remembered what it had once been. Lallo lay beneath an old blanket, pressed close to his sister. The fire still flickered in his thoughts, and Puri Mamie's voice lingered like a half-finished song. "Where the Mulo walks, the soul is the first to freeze." He mouthed the words again and again until they turned into a whisper. Every rustle outside, every snort from the horses, sounded like footsteps in the dark. He barely dared to breathe, afraid the Mulo might hear him. A faint clink broke the stillness. Someone was moving between the wagons. Lallo lifted his head. Only shapes, black against the snow. A murmur, a door closing, and the world went still again. By morning, Donna was gone. His wagon door hung open. The halter lay loose across the pole, as if he'd left in a hurry. No one spoke it aloud. The women gathered his dishes in silence, and the men smoked, staring into the embers. He was tired, one said, but Lallo knew that wasn't true. Donna was strong and always sang when he brushed the horses, loud enough to keep them calm. The children used to laugh when he slipped them mint candies. He wasn't someone who would simply walk away. That evening the fire burned again, but no one sat close together. Each kept a little distance, as if the night had grown teeth. Lallo watched Puri Mamie by the flames. Her hands rested on her knees, the fingers dusted with ash, as though she had touched the fire itself. "Mommy?" he asked softly. Was it the Mulo? She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded slowly. "He calls to those who've forgotten who they are." "But Dono never did anything wrong," Lallo protested. "The Mulo doesn't know that," she said. "He only smells when a heart has gone cold." Maybe Dono looked too often toward the distance. Lallo didn't understand, but something cold began to settle inside him. A thought he couldn't name. Later, when the camp slept, he slipped out. Snow shimmered under the moonlight. Dono's footprints led toward the trees and ended there. No second set beside them, only a shallow patch of melted snow, as if something had stood there that left no trace. He knelt, pressed his hand into the cold, and for a heartbeat he felt a tremor deep under the ground. A pulse, faint but alive. At dawn, he told no one. But that night in his dreams, he saw Dono walking a road that led downward, into a land with no sun, where quiet voices hummed without words. And sometimes, when the wind blew from the forest, it carried a smell of smoke and iron. Then Lallo would whisper to himself that the Mulo was still nearby. Chapter 2. The Shadows Across the Land, 1942. 2 winters had passed since the night the Mulo took Dono. Lallo had grown taller, his voice carried more gravel than boyhood now, and his hands were rough from mending wagons and chopping wood. But behind his eyes still lived the child who once counted footsteps in the snow. The camp no longer stayed long in one place. Every few days came the word, "Move on." Roads grew meaner, villages quieter. Strange signs hung by the crossroads, symbols Lallo couldn't read, but the grown-ups would see them and silently change direction. When the fires were lit in the evenings, no one played the fiddle anymore. No songs rose into the smoke. The laughter of the children came softer, as though the world had learned to whisper. The air smelled of rain, earth, and fear. "Mommy," Lallo asked one night, "why don't the people in the villages smile at us anymore? They used to wave when we came." The old woman added wood to the fire, and the sparks jumped like frightened birds. "Because the Mulo walks this land now," she said. "He wears new clothes. The people hear him in the steps of strangers and lock their doors so he won't come in." "But he doesn't only take us, does he?" Lallo asked. "No," she murmured. "He takes anyone who is seen when he chooses to come." By dawn, another child was gone, little Marala from the next wagon. Her scarf still hung on the post. Her wooden toy horse lay in the dirt. No one spoke her name. Puri Mamie whispered a short prayer, quick and low, so the wind couldn't steal it away. Lallo started noticing things he hadn't before. A broken branch that shouldn't have broken. Footprints that didn't match their own. A faraway voice shouting something harsh and unknown. He began to see the Mulo's shadow in every corner, in every polished boot, in every silence that fell too soon. One moonless night he saw lights moving between the trees, not torches, but smaller, steadier, too many to count. He shook Mamie awake. "Look," he whispered. "The Mulo's coming." She peered out, and her face changed in a way that frightened him more than the lights. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. "Sleep, child," she said quietly. "It's better if you don't see him." But Lallo couldn't sleep. He watched the lights creep closer, heard muffled shouts, doors slamming, a horse's scream, and somewhere a baby crying. When morning came, the air smelled of smoke. The wagons stood open, as if the night had bitten through their ropes. The grown-ups said it was the wind that had torn the canvas. But Lallo saw the marks in the mud, deep, even prints like soldiers of the earth. He followed them until the smell of oil and iron filled the air. Then he remembered Mamie's words about Muléskro Temm, the land that smelled of iron where no songs were sung. He stood there listening. The wind was cold and the silence heavy. "The Mulo walks all through Germany now," he whispered to himself. And with that he turned back, because he knew what Mamie had once warned. Whoever looks upon the Mulo too long loses the warmth inside their chest. Chapter 3. The Path of the Mulo, 1943. It was no longer winter, yet the night stayed cold. The fire didn't burn the way it used to, the wood smelled damp, and the smoke hung low, thick and gray, as if it too was afraid to rise. Lallo was older now, his jaw set, his shoulders harder. But the fear in his eyes was the same. He wore his father's belt, too big for his waist, and around his neck hung the small charm Puri Mamie had given him, a piece of old metal carved with the sun. The roads were emptier than before. No children played in the fields. No songs drifted from the villages. Sometimes when the wind was right, you could hear a clatter of chains far away, a rhythm too heavy to be human. "He's near," said Mommy one night as the horses pawed the ground. "The Mulo no longer walks alone. He has built himself great wagons of iron, and in each one he carries 100 silences." Lallo stared into her eyes. "But how can that be, Mom?" "Sighed, how can that be, Mommy? He was only a shadow, a breath between worlds." "Not anymore," she said. "When people believe in him, he grows. When they forget who they are, he takes shape." Lallo wanted to ask how a shadow could become a man, but something in her eyes told him she didn't want to know either. That night, the sound came for the first time, a low, steady pounding like the heartbeat of the earth. Then a whistle, long, sharp, as if someone had trapped the wind and made it scream. The dogs howled, the children crushed, the men stood still, not daring to move, for the sound came from everywhere at once. When it sighed, only silence remained, a silence that felt like the air itself was listening. In the days that followed, more people vanished, not just from their camp, but from the nearby villages too. Sometimes you could see the tracks, deep grooves cut into the dirt, lines that led far away and never came back. "He's taking whole families now," someone whispered. "He needs them to build his kingdom." Lallo dreamed often of those tracks. In his dreams, the wheels didn't roll on dirt. They rolled on bones, and each turn sang a song with no words. One morning when fog wrapped the fields, he heard voices behind their wagon. Strangers, men, speaking low and clear, their words sharp like frost. Mamie took his hand and whispered, "Go inside, Lallo. Don't look out. The Mulo sends his messengers first." He obeyed. Through a slit in the canvas, he saw them. Men in long coats, making marks on paper, moving without hurry, without soul. Then they left, their boots too heavy for the earth. That night, no one sang. Mamie sat by the fire and stared into the coals. "And he's grown larger now," she said. "Once he took only souls. Now he takes names." Lallo didn't understand, but he saw her shiver, though the fire burned bright. Later, when all slept, he went to the edge of the camp. Far off, the sky glowed dull red, not from sunset, it done from smoke. And somewhere in that smoke, a single light pulsed, steady, unnatural. He remembered Mommy's voice. When the wind turns cold, he's searching again. And the wind was cold. So cold that for the first time, Lallo understood what it meant for a soul to freeze. He didn't know yet that the Mulo's path had already begun, and that no one who heard that sound would ever walk back the way they came. Chapter 4, The Last Fire, 19 Morn. It was as if the night had changed its color. Usually morning came slow, the horses snorting, the soft talk of women, the first crack of new wood in the fire. But that morning it came with sound, not birds, not wind, a deep rolling thunder that belonged to the ground itself, a voice that said, "Get up." Lallo woke. The canvas above him trembled. Outside, a dog barked, once, twice, and then not again. There were footsteps, sharp voices, and the same words whispered from wagon to wagon. "He's here." No one said the soldiers. No one said the men. They all said it the old way, "The Mulo has come." The air stank of metal. Lallo pulled back the canvas flap. At the edge of the camp stood tall figures, dark shapes against a pale sky, still as trees but without roots. They did not look like wanderers. They looked like rules made of flesh. And behind them waited the iron wagons, large, heavy, hollow. They breathed cold air, as if something inside them was alive and waiting. The camp burst into motion. Children cried because their mothers did. Men shouted names, trying to count who was left. Someone looked for a shoe. Someone looked for a child. Someone searched for papers, though paper meant nothing now. Puri Mamie was already standing. Her scarf was tied tight. She looked proud, though her eyes had known this day for years. She met Lallo's gaze once, and in that single look she told him everything. "Stay with me. Don't speak. breathe quietly. Maami, he began. Hush, it's his day. Her voice was almost wind. Sometimes the Mulo walks alone. Sometimes he comes for everyone. The thunder of the wagons grew louder. It wasn't a motor, not a horse. It was the grinding of wheels on rails, the sound of the earth turning its face away. It filled the camp, the lungs, the sky. Someone shouted, "Hurry!" But no one was slow and only afraid. Mothers packed lives into blankets. Men carried pots, violins, photographs, as if anything could save them. Lallo clutched the small suitcase his father had once mended. There was no space left for stories about suitcases. The strangers moved with calm precision. Not anger, not haste, just order. And that was the cruelest thing. Order without heart. One pointed, another counted. There, I said. No shouting, just direction, as though people were pieces on a board. A woman began to sing. Her voice cracked on the second line, then fell silent. The Mulo doesn't like songs. Lallo held Mommy's hand. He felt her tremble, not from fear, but from knowing. So it's true, she murmured. Tell a story long enough, and it comes. Mommy? I tried to protect you, Lallo. From what? From men. He didn't understand. They were herded to the edge of the camp. Yesterday there had been forest there. Today there were only iron wagons. No birds, no trees, only doors that breathed. The doors were high and dark. You couldn't see what was inside, but you could smell it. Old straw, sweat, and something that had learned to fear. A child cried. He couldn't climb. A man lifted him. Another passed up a blanket. No one fought. It was the quiet kind of chaos that happens when everyone already knows how the story ends. Lallo heard one of the men outside counting. Numbers, not names. The Mulo never cared for names, only for the number of souls. Maami, where are they taking us? To the road, she said. What road? The one I told you about by the fire. Muléskro Temm. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. And I had hoped you'd never see it. Inside the wagons it was dim, the air thick and sharp. No windows, only slits of light. The floor smelled of iron and animal breath. They stood so close that their hearts seemed to beat in one chest. When the door closed, it was like another world sealed itself shut. The click of the latch was louder than any scream. Someone prayed. Someone searched for water. Someone whispered a name until their voice broke. Someone said nothing at all. The wagon jolted. A baby fell silent after crying too long. The air grew hot, then heavy. They pressed close to the cracks to breathe. Outside, the world raced past. Inside, time refused to move. Mommy, is this the place? No, she said softly. This is the path. The Mulo always walks the road first. Then he gathers the souls. Why is it so tight? Because there are many. Why so many? Because people stopped calling each other by name. The wagon clattered on, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes it stopped for hours and the waiting hurt more than the journey. Hunger came later. First thirst, then heat, then the smell, and finally the knowing that none would leave unless a door opened from the outside. A boy began to tell stories softly for the children. He spoke of rivers, of horses, of summer. But whenever he said the word fire, Maami looked at him sharply. Fire didn't belong in stories anymore. In one long stretch of stillness, Lallo leaned his head against the wall. He could feel another wagon beside theirs. Hear its rumble, hear the weeping. And he knew then, the Mulo isn't taking just us. He's taking everyone. He thought of the campfires, of Dono, of the smell of stew and pine. He heard his mommy's voice in his head. Where the Mulo walks, the soul is the first to freeze. But now it wasn't cold outside. It was inside him. Maami's eyes were closed, her lips moving in a language older than prayer. Maami, do you see him? Who? The Mulo. She opened her eyes. Today, she whispered, he wears many faces. The wagon rattled on, the sound of wheels and breath and silence. Outside, the world turned steel. Inside, the world stopped. And somewhere in Lallo's chest, something began to understand. The stories Maami had told weren't only for fear. They were to prepare the heart for a truth no one should ever have to name. He didn't yet know what the place ahead looked like, only that when no song was sung and the air smelled of iron, they would have reached it. Muléskro Temm, Chapter 5. Muléskro Temm, the epilogue. The train stopped so suddenly that everyone standing lost their balance. For a moment there was nothing, no voices, no movement, only the slow creak of cooling metal and the wind slipping through the cracks like a hand searching for a pulse. Then silence. The doors didn't open right away. A dim gray light pressed through the slits. Not morning, not mercy. The air was thick, sweet, and wrong. It smelled of soil, of smoke, of iron. Exactly as Mamie had once described in her story, Lallo knew, without needing to ask, they had reached a Muléskro Temm. "Mamie," he whispered, "is this the place?" She didn't answer. Her face was calm, too calm, like a candle burning itself to stillness. Her fingers moved faintly, as if to draw a cross in the air, but the space for blessings was already gone. When the doors finally tore open, the light was blinding. Voices shouted, cruel, not kind, just cold commands, the kind of sound that forgets that words were once made for love. Lallo held Mamie's hand, and it was warm. Outside, the wind bit like ice. He remembered the fires, the smell of soup and pine, the laughter that had lived once in their camp. All of it felt far away now, as if it belonged to another world. They stepped down. The ground was hard and black, scored with tracks that led everywhere and nowhere. In the distance, a chimney rose, breathing a slow, steady smoke, the breath of something that did not stop. Lallo felt something in him give way, quietly, mercifully, because now he understood. "Mamie," he said softly, "you were wrong." She looked at him, eyes clear despite everything. "About what?" "The Mulo doesn't come because we forgot the dead. He comes because they forgot that we're human beings." The old woman nodded once. A faint glimmer crossed her face, half grief, half pride. "Then remember who you are, Lallo," she whispered. "Because where memory stays, the Mulo cannot live." A voice outside barked an order. The line began to move. The smoke thickened, rolling like a low gray tide. Lallo gripped her hand tighter, and in that small warmth was everything the Mulo could never take. He raised his eyes to the sky, and for the first time since that night by the fire, he spoke the words himself, not from fear, but as a promise. "Where the Mulo walks, the soul is the first to freeze, but not forever." Then he stepped forward into the light, and the world fell silent. Afterward, the admonition. They say a story ends when the fire goes out. But this one must not end. As long as wind still carries the sound of human voices, as long as a child still asks, "Who was the Mulo?" the world has not yet forgotten itself. The Mulo does not rise from the ground, nor from the dark, nor from any curse of the dead. He comes from forgetting. He grows in the quiet corners where people stop listening, where names turn into numbers, where someone calls cruelty duty and silence peace. That is where he begins. So remember, speak their names, say them out loud, even when no one is there to hear. Every name spoken is a spark against his breath. Every memory is a fire he cannot cross. And if someday the wind feels too cold and someone asks you where that chill has come from, tell them it blows from the places where people stop remembering. And if they ask you whether the Mulo still walks this world, say, only if we let him. End. Where the Mulo Walks, a Sinti legend retold by Manolito Schwarz.